Thank you for coming to the Power of the People, Engaging Community in Sustainable Retrofits. Today's webinar. I'm Thomas Dietz with J&K Architects, a Chicago firm devoted principally to working with faith-based clients. And today's webinar was put on by the program's committee, an Illinois Green volunteer group that coordinates educational events covering a wide range of topics. The team that put on today's event is myself, Jason Maring, Rachel Starr, and Elena Savona. You all have been muted upon entry, so please type any questions you have into the chat and we will get them answered during the Q&A. The webinar is being recorded and will be sent out via a follow-up email. Illinois Green Alliance is a membership-driven nonprofit organization that advances green buildings and sustainable communities for all. Our recently launched 5-year strategic plan pushes the green building industry to meet or get on the path to net zero. We achieve this work through educational events such as panels and building tours, by engaging communities and partnering with organizations across Illinois, and by advocating for new policies and legislation. Members can view our recorded webinars on our on-demand webinar library. Check out IGA's events calendar and our Connect and Learn online page for upcoming webinars. Today, we will be hearing from Joseph Clare as our moderator, as well as Leslie Showers, Doug Farr, and Edis Denick. Joseph Clare served as the principal in charge of the Database Plus studio within the larger building systems firm DBHMS, where he leads a multidisciplinary team providing research-driven, human-centered design support to guide projects toward better outcomes. He previously served as the first director of campus energy and sustainability for the Illinois Institute of Technology and the managing engineer for the Chicago Public Schools supporting energy management, construction, and existing building operations for both organizations. With nearly 30 years in the building business, Joseph has worked as a contractor, designer, construction manager, commissioning authority, and owner, seeing all ends of the market. Now I will turn things over to our moderator, Joseph, to introduce today's speakers. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Thomas. I'm glad to be here today. I think this is an outstanding panel. We actually, full disclosure, all worked together on this project over many years. And so we had been able to experience firsthand how incredible the three speakers you're going to hear from, the three panelists you're going to hear from today are. I'd like to start with Leslie Showers. Leslie has been on staff at the Institute of Cultural Affairs for 11 years, where she now holds the position of Chief Operations Officer. She is charged with restoring a 1921 Chicago landmark building and doing deep energy retrofits. She currently sits on the board of Passive House Alliance Chicago and One North Side. Leslie believes the way to release the capacity to create positive, sustainable futures is by engaging in action towards sustainability, sharing knowledge and wisdom, and transforming how groups and organizations invite change. Doug Farr is the founding principal and president of Farr Associates Architecture and Urban Design. Doug is a national leader in planning and designing sustainable neighborhoods and buildings. He is a published author who lectures widely on the topics of urbanism and sustainability. Doug founded the U.S. Green Building Council's Lead for Neighborhood Development, LEED ND Core Committee, the interdisciplinary group of professionals who created the first rating system for sustainable land development. Based on the firm's pioneering sustainable design practice and insights gained from chairing LEED ND, Doug authored the urban planning bestseller, Sustainable Urbanism, Urban Design with Nature, in 2008. Edis Denick is a thorough and thoughtful builder and educator. Born in a small town of Bosnia, then immigrated to Chicago, where he's lived for the past 22 years. His interest in building, giving back, and the environment has led Edis to establish Fused Builders, a construction company focused on collaborative and green building practices. He was taught electrical and HVAC classes at he has taught electrical and HVAC classes at vocational schools and has been involved in the nonprofit world for over 15 years. I'm now going to turn it over to Leslie, who's going to give us a primer on the project and ICA.
Leslie, you're muted.
I sure am. Thanks. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about the ICA Green Rise and ICA. Actually, if you can advance the slides, probably two. And one more, please. It's a great picture of our building. So I want you to imagine, just suppose you were walking in Uptown and happened to pass 4750 North Sheridan Road. You might see a relic from Chicago's past, an old insurance company, a building that has a terracotta facade, and you probably would think it's pretty chilly and boring in there. But little would you know that this is a vibrant urban experiment, a living demonstration of retrofitting and energy efficiency. It's home to 2 intentional residential communities, over 19 different nonprofit organizations, all serving Uptown and the greater Chicago area. And those tenants have over 1,000 client interactions every week. You would know that just a couple of years ago, that approximately 220 students from all universities across the state of Illinois came to this building for a service learning project and went to 77 neighborhoods, all 77 neighborhoods in Chicago, to document all the sustainable initiatives that were going on in that neighborhood. You would also know that we were the first nonprofit building owner to be asked to join Retrofits Chicago, and that we made that commitment to lower our energy consumption in 20 years. We met our goal in 4 years and exceeded it. And little would you know that we have the second largest rooftop solar array on top of this building that generates 25% of our energy. And that just this summer, we launched Chicago Carbon-Free Building Demonstrations. We're working on that title. We know it's long, but we're going to get something catchy. But we are in collaboration with 8 buildings in Uptown who are anxious to start doing the work of making their buildings carbon-free. And we're helping that process along. Next slide, please. So to talk about this project, this is a few facts just about the building and what's happening. The building is 100 years old this year. It's classical revival design. It's 166,000 square feet, and that's rentable square feet. And I do believe it's 218 gross square feet. It is a Chicago landmark building. It's also on the National Registry of Historic Places. And those are just a few quick facts about that. I'm anxious to get into the panel discussion, so I'm going to give it back to you, Joe.
That's great. Thank you so much, Leslie. All right, I'm going to invite Doug and Edis to turn on their cameras so that we can start with the discussion. And Doug, I'm going to throw the first question to you after Leslie gave that great introduction. I think one of the things that we, as an industry, try to latch onto are straightforward narratives, convenient ways to talk about project successes. So whether it's zero energy or whether it's electrification or their certification of some sort, this project doesn't fall into any of those simple narratives. So how do we talk about this project and its successes in a way that truly conveys what is happening when we don't have those kind of easy touchstones?
Geez, thanks, Joe. Great introduction, Leslie. So yeah, this is one of those kind of complex stories to tell. I will say over the time we've been involved, which is 5 or 6 years, is that right, Leslie? Something like that. Right. The story has sort of shifted, and I think it's oscillated between a clear ideal of a story. We will be a net zero building at 8 stories in the Uptown neighborhood, which is really hard to do for a building that tall with kind of legacy insulation and kind of inefficiencies. It's just kind of not enough roof area, not enough ground area to kind of really do that. Then the narrative, so, okay, we're maybe not that, but then we're all electric. And then we had God's hand or fate or whatever kind of caused a boiler to quit over the summer. We had to replace, just kind of practical. We just got to get a new boiler in for winter. And so we bought a new piece of equipment that kept us further from our second goal, which is we're all electric. We will be all electric eventually, but like for a little while, we're going to not be there. So what I think about this project is that it goes back to the mission of ICA, which before any of us were involved, and frankly, before some of the people on this call were born, ICA has had the same kind of aspirational global mission of bringing communities together and setting a high bar. And if you go on the website, and please do, this is what they do worldwide, is they facilitate conversations kind of like the one we're having now. So like their mission was set. And so when they get knocked off course by little things, well, the building's maybe a little too tall to do net zero, or we had to buy a boiler for a couple of years, whatever, like they're still on course because their mission was clear, and they have a deep bench, and that's their culture and that's their mission. And so to an outsider that wouldn't know the ICA inside story, I think it can seem a little complex, but to me, it's really clear, and particularly working with Leslie and the board and Jim and all the staff. I think it's an urban project that is, in its context, is aspiring to net zero and all electric, and we'll get there eventually. So I'll stop my answer there.
That's great. Thank you, Doug. Edis, I want to bring you in to talk about the interaction with the community piece, because there are two forms that community involvement take. It's obviously the support for our project, but then there's also having to live with the building and live with the project. And as part of the team that helps to do, kind of acts as that interaction with the community. What are some of the specific challenges that you face in the conversations with members of the community about, when a building like this undergoes such a great transformation, both internally and obviously with the systems within the building?
Obviously, the building has to keep running. So we're doing this renovation with essentially 90% of the tenants still having to receive heat and receive cooling and everything else during the renovation itself. So getting everybody together and actually discussing what this process is was very important for this. Every tenant was involved in kind of planning the steps of how we're going to achieve this. I'm drawing a little bit of a blank right now. I apologize.
No, that's great. That's I appreciate that answer. That's the ongoing operations of the building is so critical. You don't have the opportunity to always go in and completely evacuate a building, gut rehab it, and then move everybody back in. As Leslie pointed out, the building has to still serve the community and the 1,000 people that come in and rely on this building in a given week, and that can be a real challenge. Leslie, I want to kind of throw a question out to you specifically. We talk for those of us who are really interested in moving buildings forward and moving building projects forward, we always talk about how important it is to have a champion, someone on the inside who really gets it and wants to move it forward. And in a very superficial way, it's easy to see you as a champion for this project. But I'd like to ask a couple of questions about that. One is, what are the real challenges that we don't see for someone to be a champion, even at a mission-driven organization like ICA? What are some of the challenges that we don't see, and how can those of us who are working with people on projects really support them and help champions to really succeed?
That's a good question, Joe. I would say, well, the mission for us to stay connected to the mission and why, the purpose and why we're doing this project has always been there for us. I don't think that's ever been challenged. What is a challenge is putting together the resources to do this. It's very difficult for a nonprofit who doesn't have the ready cash to go and do a renovation like this. So what do we have to do? We've got to look to other sources, other grants, other funding, loans, things of that nature, and there's no clear path on how to get there. It's most of this time has taken us learning about what resources we need to get this done. And those resources come and go. Some come in, we're ready to go, then they go out. So I would say really finding a clear path or some central area that nonprofits or any community, company, organization that wants to do something like this, a way to show them how to do it, to get the resources, to get the capital to do it, because I can see that as being a deterrent immediately.
Can you talk a little further about the, you talked about the conversations with other partners, bringing on and trying to identify other sources of capital and grants. How do you, can you give a little bit of insight in how to, how do you develop those relationships? How do you bring those in? Who are some of the maybe the key partners that you had in bringing this project forward?
So we have a really good real estate consultant who is very versed in using historic tax credits. So we were a Chicago landmark. That's one resource that helped us out. Because of the area that we're in, we were able to use new market tax credits too. We were very fortunate to find a person who was very familiar with both of them and who has worked with both of them. Any other things that we learned have been presentations like this, that I would go out and talk about the project, or someone would talk about the project and someone would approach me and say, hey, we've got a grant for that. You know, we can bring that resource in. There's PACE is also in this, so there's TIF, there's all of these things that as we talked about the project and got exposure, that people would come in and say, you can put this in your capital stack too, or we have money for this to put in your capital stack. It was definitely a huge learning curve.
Great. And Edis, one last question to throw to you in kind of this opening round of questions. What are some of the specific challenges in the specific ICA building in terms of the existing systems and maybe the existing layout of the building that presented some of the clearest challenges to the project?
ICA has a fairly complicated HVAC system that's very antiquated. We're running steam boilers essentially that have two different ways of operating or being controlled. There are perimeter radiators throughout the whole building, and then on top of that, there are air handlers, 2 per floor. So to be able to integrate all those existing systems with the new hot water systems is quite a challenge. The building automation system that we have at this point here is seriously lacking. There's essentially sensors throughout the building that the engineers are able to look at, but not much control as far as the air handlers go. So essentially, right now, what we're doing is monitoring and then going around the building and adjusting things by hand. So integrating those old systems with the new is going to be quite a challenge.
That's great. I do want to one note. We're going to have a couple more facilitated questions for the panelists. If you have a question you would like asked after that or as part of that process, please throw those in the Q&A and not the chat. That way we can collect them and make sure to get those to Leslie, Doug, and Edis. One of the questions that we talked about, Leslie, can you give maybe a little bit of background? We've talked a lot about the actual kind of getting and doing the project. What was the impetus from the project in the first place? What kind of drove the taking on this is a 100-year-old building. And one of the things we know is that, when 2050 comes around and a lot of these decarbonization challenges that people are taking on, most of the buildings that are going to exist then exist now. So what we do with existing buildings, especially older ones, is important. So what drove you to take a look at this 100-year-old building and say, yeah, we're gonna do this. Like, this is what we're gonna do.
So when I first got to ICA, Edis gave me a list of things that were wrong with the building that spread across my desk. And he said, here, we have to fix these. I said, okay, but we took a step back from that and decided not to replace system for system. We decided to marry what ICA was all about in our mission and this asset, this huge asset that we have, and come up with a holistic plan of getting to where we need to be with this building. So instead of replacing system for system, we decided that since we're trying to be, like Doug said in the beginning, net zero and all of that, let's take a step back, look at the whole building as a whole, and make a plan for getting there. And that's how we did it. It was just by, we needed things. Boilers were going out. Electric was going haywire. Plumbing is old.
Sounds
I'd
like,
like to add that there was quite a bit of input from the engineers in the design of this project. I mean, between the two engineers that we have in the building here, they have about 50 years of experience combined solely in this building. So they know things inside out, and it really was a big help in trying to implement or combining those two systems now.
Doug, can you talk a little bit about your, where you started out and when you started on the project, and how some of that, that very practical conversation that Edison and Leslie had, that was the impetus, how you got involved and then moved it from where it was then to where it is now?
Yeah, when we started, Leslie showed me this list, and I just had to avert my eyes because it was like too thorough and too long, and just it makes you despair, like we'll never get through it. So, but of course we showed up and added to the list other things because, our original program didn't include what we ended up focusing a lot of our time on, which was, if you go to the building, there's a very deep first floor, and the building was originally built as an L and occupied a corner, kind of a classic Chicago, 7-8 story commercial building. The kind of inside of the L corner got filled in with a 1-story thing. So there was this really deep first floor that had no natural light, no windows, and was frankly unrentable. And so on one hand, we were trying to electrify and decarbonize the building. On the other hand, its ground floor, which was in some ways, the engine rents are, even though they charge modestly, the rents are the engine, the economic engine of sustainability for the building's function. And so we kind of got involved, and as architects sort of like, you need to do something with the back of this ground floor because it's really not attractive. There's no address. You have to sort of cut through other people's spaces. And so on top of Edis's list came another list of like, the bones of the building upstairs are pretty good, but ground floor needs some chiropractic. So we really focused a lot, kind of refocused to renovating that ground floor just to kind of fix the bones of the building. So that was one. Yeah. So, and that was, again, there's sort of like the living, the one thing that I think about this project is you got to kind of come see it, and then, the anticipating kind of where we'll end up today, lessons learned. I do feel like the fact that ICA is so mission driven, that they can take these kind of adjustments, these living kind of realities of what the project has to contend with, and still sort of stay on course because they're so solid in their focus and their foundation and mission. And so, it blew, like Odysseus on the journey, kind of 10 days of gale, blown back to harbor, and they're setting sail still and moving forward. I'm sorry for the sailing analogies. I guess I want to be somewhere warm.
Edison and Leslie, you guys can talk a little bit. Can you give a little more specific of how those tenant conversations went and how they evolved? As Doug noted, as the project evolved, how did your conversations with with your tenants in the building and your and the other key stakeholders proceed going through this process?
Well, this project has had quite a few delays. And one of the big challenges was just keeping everybody on board and committed to it. A lot of people have questions whether this project will happen at all. So we're in constant communication, and it helps that most of the tenants in our building are actually non-for-profit also. So they understand the challenges that come along with that. We've really had good feedback so far.
Yeah, and our tenants, the one good thing about having all of these nonprofits together, for one, it's like a one-stop shop for everyone in the community. So everyone is very supportive in this building, and we've had a lot of turns and curves and had to readjust and refocus. But the tenants in this building kind of understand that what we're doing is to improve their tenancy, is to improve how they function in the building and how they work in the building. Also, the experience that their participants have when they come into the building too. So, you know, in the nonprofit world, we're used to doing things slow.
Leslie, you talked a little earlier about, you know, the buildings in Uptown. You know, this is not, you know, one of the, you know, it's not downtown Chicago. It's not, you know, any of the real hot spots for development. You talk about how the process of going through this project has impacted, you know, kind of your neighbors or the people in Uptown, other organizations that you work with, and how they look to this as a kind of a cornerstone project that can also help them understand what they can do.
So we've had lots of discussions about retrofitting buildings. We've had lots of energy forums, a lot of things that were going on in the neighborhood. And then we had a conversation with a tenant that was in the building who has expanded, who is doing good work as far as affordable housing for women. And as they build new buildings, how can they become more sustainable? And because we're going through it, and we are going through it, we were able to help, to offer some advice, and then found out that there were other buildings that were interested in doing that too, coming to take a look at the solar array or whatever it may be. We invite that. We invite that in. Let's talk about it. You know, I'm of the conscious of, yes, we can talk about it and we're going to talk about it forever, but let's start doing something. And so these buildings here in Uptown have decided that they want to do something. And we formed this collaboration, which I really think is great, that a building of this size gives them hope to at least start doing something.
And Doug, I'd kind of throw a similar question to you: is what have you and your practice learned from this project, and how are you, what are you taking forward and bringing forward to other similar kind of reuse or adaptive reuse projects?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. So, I think of ICA as kind of the city of Chicago in microcosm. We have hundreds of thousands, and this is kind of putting on my carbon-free Chicago hat more so than my FAR Associates hat. But, as a city, we have hundreds of thousands of existing buildings. To your point, most of the buildings that we will have electrified, hopefully by 2050, exist today. And the journey that ICA is taking is one that needs to be repeated like 500,000 times. Right. And so you always start from an imperfect place. Do I start with insulation, or do I buy electric appliances, or a little of each? Can I go from one column A, column B, column C? And so the ideal rational way to do it is you button up the envelope and you get perfect windows and you eliminate all thermal bridges. Well, friends, it's a terracotta building, it's masonry, those aren't options. And so the envelope is can get a lot better, but it's never going to be great. And so, sort of what do you do first and in what order? And again, that's that sort of pragmatic living master plan driven by, I think, the mission that certainly ICA as an institution has, and Leslie kind of has inside personally. But as complex as this is, it makes me both hopeful and just concerned about, does everyone have to be an expert like Edis and Leslie in terms of knowing what to do and kind of staying the course? Do we need 500,000 teams like this for the city to do what it needs to accomplish? So it's more of a question. And then the second thing is just, I think that when you look at how change happens in a society, it's interesting that this panel is happening right after Glasgow summit, and sort of people, I think they have this instinct to say, well, it's a global, climate is a global problem, so it should have a global solution. So let's figure out what the largest unit of, international governance is. Well, maybe it's the COP panels of the United Nations or something like that. Let's make them responsible, and they will in turn make our national leaders responsible. Well, in theory, that's good. It strikes me as the slowest possible path to change is to have it go global and then somehow filter back down. And so ICA is a kind of counter model or a complementary model where you say you've got a mission-driven entity with a complex project that's, got a living 10 or 15-year kind of, plan to pursue this. And then they've got neighbors that are noticing. And that's pretty cool. So I don't know, I'm really not up to speed. I'd love to hear more from Leslie and others, how this kind of conversation is going with the neighboring buildings. But your journey is not unique. It's got to be replicated, within our one city, hundreds of thousands of times, and in the world, a billion times, right? So we're all eyes are on you, Leslie and Edis. Don't screw up. Please don't screw up. That's a joke. But I'd love to hear more about how the neighbors are learning from your example.
And I think that leads into, for Edis and then for Leslie, where do the conversations with your tenants, both existing, and how do you see maybe challenges as you bring in new tenants, as the spaces are revitalized, as Doug mentioned, opening up more light and more opportunity for more rentable space and more people to come in. Where do you see these conversations going forward? And how do you think the project has maybe, inspired your tenants, or are they still just, focused on their day to day, or have you noticed their conversations with you changing as you guys have taken on this project?
So I would say our existing tenants are going through this with us, right? They know what our mission is. And so they are online with it. We have a better opportunity with our new tenants that come in. When they come in, they know that we're going through this retrofit, this energy efficiency. They know what we're trying to do to this building, and that attracts them. So they are on board to do whatever the building is doing, because that's where they want to be. We're doing an energy efficient project, and it's attracting the type of tenants that we want. Our existing tenants have been with us for a very long time. They know us, they're just trucking along with us. We implement, right now, I think we're trying to do composting in the building. We'll see how that goes, but it's an experiment that we're willing to try. We already have a recycling program, and we tried a shared resource thing in the building. So our tenants are trucking along with us. It's the new tenants that there's another set of opportunities with.
Edis, do you see any, with the energy efficiency retrofits and the kind of modifications to the building, are there any specific kind of tenant training that you foresee needing, or both for the new tenants coming on and maybe for the old tenants as some of the systems change a little bit from what they had before?
Go ahead, answer that, Edis. I'm waiting to hear that.
Didn't mean to overly put you on the spot there.
Go ahead, Edis.
Well, there are quite a few challenges we have as it is, with educating tenants. Our systems are extremely complicated, and it's not just, setting the thermostat and then forgetting it. So we've actually had quite a few instances where we've brought tenants together and had discussions about how our existing systems work and what they can do to help us keep energy costs down. Everybody in the summer wants 70 degrees, and in the winter they want 80 degrees, and just readjusting people's expectations for a building of this age and this size is very important, and discussion is the only thing that seems to help. We're moving forward, we're going to have maybe every 6 months or a year or so, kind of a re-education of what can we do, combined as a building that to meet our goals as far as energy conservation goes.
If I can build on what Etta said, we started the project in 2016 with Charette, and it was kind of classic the way we like to do it, which is the whole team, management, engineers, ownership, the board, neighbors, tenants, that whole, kind of doing it right and listening and recording insights. But I'll say that, from the architect's point of view, like you can do that when you're actively involved, and then kind of your role is fulfilled. You've done your active work, and it kind of leaves it to the owner in this case to kind of renew and update and affirm those kind of understandings over time. Again, and Jim, I saw Jim Choxel put in the chat the kind of mission, but ICA again is like the perfect, like a central casting client to be, that kind of community sustaining, entity. So, because I think the title of the session today was something like the power of the people, or something like that. So we sort of started there, but ICA sustains that on their own.
Doug, can you kind of latch on? You used a great term, the idea that ICA was out of central casting. Like if you wanted a client to work with on this project, and as Jim noted in the chat, the mission of ICA, is to build a just and equitable society in harmony with planet Earth. Like it's right there. What can you draw from the process that helps when working with a client who isn't so perfect, doesn't fit the suit, like Johnny Bravo, so to speak? Like, how do you work with someone that's not quite there, but yet, try to get them there?
Did I hear Leslie trying to get a word in there?
Please do.
You take it away first, Seth. Go ahead.
Oh, thanks so much. So, first of all, I think every organization should just adopt ICA's mission word for word. You can have two missions, the one you had last week, and then add this one to it. So I think, as we work together on a lot of things, and it's hard because, we show up with that same mission. It's worded differently, I think, from ICA's, but it's, pretty darn close. And so, you look for the roots in whatever client group or institution you're working with. Sometimes it's written down on the website and it's the mission. Sometimes it's the single person on the board or the leader of the organization that shares that passion. So you're looking for rubbing two sticks together to get a kind of critical mass to kind of move forward on with the agenda you want. It's easiest with ICA where the bench is deep and everyone's on board. So it's always just a kind of community organizing challenge within the client group, not to mention the consultants. We have the right team on this project, so there's no kind of misalignment in what we're all trying to strive. But I will just say, just always kind of scratching for who are the leaders and who's going to, stick with it, when it gets complicated or difficult or costs $1 more, all those kinds of things. You got to just kind of keep your coalition together. So, but Leslie, you were going to say something.
I was. Joe, give me the question again. I'll hop on with that.
The question was to Doug was, how do you, when you don't have a client who's as mission driven as ICA is and whose mission aligns so neatly with the outcome of the goals of the project, how do you have that? How do you work with the client to get to that point? And so I think maybe, you with your, experiences prior to coming to ICA and coming into that, what are some of the things you've learned there that you can tell, to people working with, it's not people whose mission isn't as kind of neatly aligned as ICA's is?
There's a lot in that question. Interesting. So I would say that, in some of the buildings that we're collaborating with right now, I would say that there is a lot of interest, and a lot of people in the management team want to make their buildings carbon free or more energy efficient, whatever it may be. Not everybody's on board, but being their champion and keeping it in front of them and making sure they have the resources that they need. Someone has to do it. Otherwise, this work gets hard and you fall off and you go, why do it? It's too many obstacles in the way. So for me, it's being, I guess, the champion for everybody. So.
That's great. I got one last question, and we've got some great questions coming in from the audience that I want to get to. And I'll start with Edis. Leslie brought up a great point. Like, it's just so easy. There's so many obstacles in the way of doing things like this. I want to find out from each of you, what is it that personally drives you and keeps you sustained through this? This project alone has just been a 5-year project that's still working its way through. What kind of keeps you going and keeps you hopeful and keeps you moving forward on these kind of endeavors? I'll start with you, Edis, and we'll go around the table.
I've been involved at ICA for close to 20 years at this point. I think my father has been a building engineer here for over 20 years, since we moved to Chicago, basically. And so there's a personal connection there. There's a personal drive to make this building better known, to essentially keep it for what it is and not let it be taken over by a developer and just kind of thrown into what the rest of Uptown seems to be going towards. I think there's a big importance here to keep nonprofits in Uptown alive, and I think that's kind of going away a little bit. So I have a personal drive to get this project going and make it succeed.
Sounds good. What about you, Doug? What's the drive for you?
Oh goodness, this is the only important work to be doing, right? And if it was easy, everyone would do it all day and so on. So we have been blessed to either have found clients who, like ICA, who already have the kind of their head on square, they have the right mission, all that kind of stuff, or been willing or able to work with people who weren't there to get them to, act accordingly. So this is just the work we do, and we do it all day. And, your head hurts a little bit, but like, I'm not tempted to sit at my desk and do buildings that just, comply with the baseline energy code. Like we've never, as an office, I think this is true. We have never done a building that just meets the energy code, not once. So just kind of our mission, it's my drive, is believing that as a private sector design firm, the best way to advance society is to voluntarily deliver projects that exceed current codes, because it creates the space for the codes to improve. When, City Hall says we can't possibly impose that code on anybody, no one knows how to do it, or the private sector is not doing it on their own, we can't require it. And so the projects like ICA and others of ours are those data points to say, no, you can step up the code. Here's how it worked. Here's what it cost. Here's the steps. And it's not crazy. And that project exists within your municipality. So, go for it. So as I say, my head is cluttered with all kinds of notions, amongst them ideas of like theories of change and how an individual architectural project can inform and amplify what an entire city could do. So I'm sort of delusional in a very good and healthy way. And this is just the work we want to do. And I'll just say, doing it also with people who you, I'll say it, people who you love, people whose hearts are pure and are, show up to work every day and are trying to do their best version of their work is kind of essential. You gotta like each other. You gotta, share in the challenge and celebrate as you go.
Leslie, I'll give you the last word before we go to the audience Q&A. What is it that keeps you going? What personally drives you in through this?
So for me, this has been, I woke up to this a very long time ago. I was in health insurance policy most of my life. My mom and I had our own business, and I woke up to this late, and I went to architect school very late in my life, but immediately knew that doing this work is important. And I was lucky enough to find an organization who is crazy enough to do big projects. They're not afraid of it. We've never, ever done anything easy. Never. So it just has never happened. But the mission of the organization and my personal mission lines up so very well. And we do this project because we have to. We do this project because now there are 8 other buildings in Uptown that want to do the same thing. And they need to know how can we get this done? We do this project so that we can use this very large asset that we have as a demonstration on how to do it. We're willing to take the bumps and the knots and the turns and all of that so that we can help somebody else move forward.
Sounds great. So I'm going to go to some of the questions that are in the Q&A. I think some of them have already been answered as part of some other pieces. But one that I thought was really interesting is you mentioned before that the ICA is supports faith-based partners and initiatives. Have any of the larger diocesan style churches or organizations come to you, or have you come to them? Have there been any conversations, partnership? Are they an ally, or are they learning from this? Has there been any kind of communication with them on this, as certainly recognizing that some of them are pretty large landowners and owners of large historical buildings? It might seem to be a natural tie. Just a question from the audience is wondering what kind of conversations have happened there.
We had a faith-based energy forum a couple of years ago. We have not had any conversations with any specific church or group yet that's willing or ready to do this work, but knowing that there is a group that's interested in energy efficiencies or retrofits or sustainability at all, we help them and organize them and facilitate them to have all the workshops that they want to have in this building. But that's a good question. For our decarb demonstration, there's lots of churches in Uptown, so they may be next on our list.
Sounds good. Edis, there's a question in here about the kind of some of the logistics around the renovation. You mentioned working around existing tenants. Are there any plans to do any kind of swing space for tenant relocation or use, or how is some of this renovation seen as it goes forward, even from this initial project through future years, and either moving, relocating, or working with tenants to continue the improvements?
Yeah, quite a few tenants are actually affected by the renovation itself. It's a large part of the whole building is part of this project. One of our tenants actually is not going to have any bathrooms during this renovation, so we've had to come up with different ways of providing that. We've offered to actually build out bathrooms for them. We're still working on the logistics of that. There's a clinic on the second floor that is largely affected. Right now they're served by one of our air handlers that's actually going away completely, and that space is going to be used for new equipment. So we're going to have, the challenge here is to get everything done in a very short period of time and during a very specific time of year. We can only change equipment out, between cooling and heating seasons. So the scope of work and the actual steps that have to be taken to get this done is very specific, and the times are very short. So we really have had to communicate quite a bit with these tenants and make sure that everybody's on board and everybody knows the exact schedule of when things are happening. The sequence of things at this point has had to change quite a few times, because every time we delay the project slightly, we have to change the sequence completely. We can't just go ahead and demo the existing stuff. It has to be, we either have to provide and complete the new heating cooling systems before we demo, or get everything done in between the heating cooling seasons. So it's been quite challenging.
Another question came in that I will exercise a little bit of moderator prerogative and answer part of it myself, but I encourage anybody else to jump in. Which strategies other than the existing PV had the biggest impact on the energy efficiency? And one of the keys here, as Doug mentioned, was to make the building ready for electrification. And so the heating and cooling and ventilation systems were decoupled so that heating and cooling could be done through a radiant system, and the ventilation can be done through a dedicated outside air system that can have and also be future adapted to greater energy recovery. The idea being that with the radiant system, lower temperature hot water and the higher temperature cold water allows for easier adaptation to a heat pump when the boiler system does eventually age out. Those could be replaced with a reversing chiller, and the building interior systems can stay the same. And that was really the biggest drive. Obviously, high efficient lighting and LED lighting is a big piece of dropping energy, but the heating and cooling was really where the biggest changes were made. And then one question that came in is about, ICA is known for facilitation and for the programs it provides in facilitation. How did you use facilitation to engage with tenants and continue to engage? I think you mentioned, Edis, that you have regular sessions with them. It's not just the one-on-one conversations, but can you talk a little bit more about how that facilitation works? And do you tap into some of your own expertise in that as an organization when you go through those conversations?
We've set up with some of our larger tenants, we've set up essentially monthly meetings at this point to keep them updated on not just the projects, but everything else that's going on in the building. I'll let Leslie talk a little bit more about the actual facilitation side. That's not my expertise, but it's very important to keep everybody informed of even the little steps. I think keeping people in the dark just at the end causes issues. So we've really stepped up and try to have almost monthly meetings with tenants to keep them informed on everything.
Yeah, all of our meetings, through the meeting and at the end of the meeting, we want our tenants to know that this project is for them. It's going to take care of them. And kind of give them a schedule of when it's going to happen and how things are going to proceed. We use facilitation in every group meeting that we have. It's the ICA way, so that we can have a very productive conversation where all voices are heard. And at the end, everyone can come away with an understanding of what's going to happen and concerns have been met. So Edison and I, we think it's extremely important, and it's been left up to us mostly to make sure that the tenants are involved, that we have those meetings. Our GC is really good about doing that as well. So it's been a really good open process for our tenants.
Yeah, I'll chime in a little bit more. We're before the project actually takes off, the plan is to get every tenant kind of in a town hall discussion and raise any concerns all at the same time, so that we can kind of get feedback on how everybody, what everybody thinks, and raise any concerns that they may have.
Sounds great. All right. Well, we are almost out of time. Wanted to give each panelist one last chance to kind of give a closing thought. And what's the one lesson you want the audience to learn from this project as they go out and become, ambassadors to other projects trying to accomplish the same thing? And Doug, I'll start with you.
Thanks, Joe. I think that the great insight is that you need a master plan, that it's not, one project or one piece of equipment or any of that. I mean, all of those are part of it, but you need a plan, and that the plan has to be a living plan that can, a resilient plan, if you will, that can respond to just, pragmatic stuff that happens in the real world. Do a master plan.
Edis, what about you? Go to you next.
I'd say it's very important to kind of take the people that are usually left out or overlooked in the design and implementation of these types of projects is the actual, end user of all of this. The engineers, the maintenance folks, the people who are going to be using this equipment and taking care of it. It's very important to get them involved early on. They usually know the buildings and their intricacies a lot better than any expert that can come in from the outside. I think that aspect gets overlooked quite a bit, and I think it's extremely important.
Leslie, you'll have our last word today.
I would agree with Doug. One of the lessons that we learned, and it was a very important lesson, is to start with a master plan. We know what has to be done, but start with a plan so that you have a roadmap on how to get there. And it's not going to be easy. It's not. There's going to be lots of bumps in the road. There's going to be craters in the road. There's going to be all of those things. But if you have a roadmap and a way forward, then you can get there. You'll get there.
And thank you so much for that, Leslie. And Leslie Showers, Edis Denish from ICA, Doug Farr from Farr Associates. Thank you guys so much for your time and your expertise. Thanks to everyone for joining, and for Illinois Green. I'll turn it back over to Thomas.
Thank you so much for all of our panelists on a fantastic presentation. It was very informative, and this is certainly a promising project that will hopefully lead to a brighter future throughout Chicago and beyond. I do believe the only remaining event of the 2021 programming year is the virtual Women in Green Building Breakfast this upcoming Thursday morning, featuring Jessica Bolhofer, Michelle McGlendon, Angela Tovar, and Emma Cox. So please review the events calendar on the Illinois Green website for more information. And thank you again to all of our panel and to all the attendees on wrapping up an excellent programming year.